Metal music makes you angrier, or the opposite? Hi everyone, I'm Sergio Popovici, and today we're going to talk about something that challenges everything most people believe. Metal music doesn't make you angrier. Research proves it actually does the opposite. And I'll explain why this is important to understand, because this reveals fundamental truths about how we process emotions and why judging people's music choices might be completely missing the point. Most people think listening to extreme music like metal, hardcore, or screamo makes you more aggressive and angry. Parents worry about it. Schools ban certain bands. And there's a widespread assumption that chaotic, heavy, loud music must create chaos, heaviness, and aggression in the listener. But a 2015 study published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience by researchers from the University of Queensland found something remarkable. It's completely wrong. Leah Sharman and Dr. Genevieve Dingle conducted a controlled experimental study with 39 extreme music listeners aged 18 to 34 years. They deliberately made participants angry through an anger induction process. Then, randomly assigned them to either 10 minutes of listening to extreme music from their own playlist or 10 minutes of silence as a control group. They measured both heart rate as an objective physiological marker and subjective emotional ratings using the positive and negative affect scale, known as PANAS. Here's what they discovered. Ratings of hostility, irritability, and stress increased during the anger induction for everyone, as expected. But after the music or silence, these negative emotions decreased in both groups. The metal music didn't make angry participants angrier. In fact, the findings indicated that extreme music appeared to match participants' physiological arousal and resulted in an increase in positive emotions. Participants who were already feeling angry listened to metal, and instead of becoming more aggressive, their heart rate stayed stable and their emotions aligned with the music. Many reported feeling more engaged and better able to process what they were feeling rather than the music amplifying their anger. Now let me explain the psychological mechanism behind why this works, because understanding this transforms how we think about music and emotion. The key concept here is called mood matching. When music reflects your current emotional state, it can actually help you release those feelings rather than suppress them. Think about it this way. If you're furious and someone tells you to listen to calm, peaceful music, it creates cognitive dissonance. Your internal state is chaos and rage, but the external input is tranquility. This mismatch can actually make you feel worse because you're being told your emotions are wrong. But when you're angry and you listen to music that matches that intensity, fast, loud, aggressive, powerful, it validates your emotional experience. The music is essentially saying, yes, this intensity you're feeling is real and acceptable, which paradoxically allows you to process and release it rather than suppress or amplify it. Research by psychologists has shown that music is a widely available form of media with the ability to influence attitudes and manipulate emotions. Listeners are drawn to music that reflects or improves their emotional state. And this study confirms that for extreme music fans, heavy music serves an important emotional regulation function. Now let's look at the specific characteristics of extreme music and why they matter for this process. Extreme music, which includes heavy metal, emo, hardcore, punk, screamo, and their various subgenres, is characterized by chaotic, loud, heavy, and powerful sounds with emotional vocals. The lyrics often contain themes of anxiety, depression, social isolation, and loneliness, which might seem concerning on the surface. But here's what the research reveals. These musical and lyrical characteristics don't create these emotions in listeners. They provide a container for emotions the listeners are already experiencing. Ready? For someone struggling with anxiety, a song that explicitly addresses anxiety through powerful music can be intensely validating and cathartic. It's the difference between feeling alone in your struggle versus feeling that someone understands exactly what you're going through. The Sharman and Dingle study is particularly important because it used controlled experimental methods. which previous research on this topic had lacked. Many earlier claims that extreme music causes anger and aggression were based on correlation, observing that some aggressive people listen to metal and assuming the music caused the aggression. But correlation doesn't prove causation, and this controlled experiment demonstrates that the causal relationship people assume simply doesn't exist. When you deliberately make people angry and then expose them to extreme music under controlled conditions, the music doesn't make them angrier. In fact, participants in the music condition showed enhanced positive affect, meaning their positive emotions actually increased after listening to their preferred extreme music while angry. Now let's talk about what happened with heart rate measurements, because the physiological data is crucial here. The researchers measured heart rate continuously throughout the experiment to get an objective measure of arousal alongside the subjective emotional reports. In the silence condition, heart rate reduced after the anger interview as participants calmed down passively. In the music condition, heart rate remained somewhat elevated because the music itself is arousing. It's fast, intense, and energizing. But critically, the elevated heart rate wasn't paired with increased anger or aggression. It was paired with increased positive emotions and better emotional processing. The music matched the arousal level, but shifted the emotional tone from hostile to engaged and inspired. This finding is consistent with earlier research by Gowan Smith and Bloom from 1997, which found that heavy metal music was highly arousing to both fans and non-fans, but did not cause an increase in subjective anger in fans. The arousal and the emotion are separate. You can be physiologically activated without being angry, and extreme music creates this activated but positive state. Now here's why this matters beyond just defending metal music. It reveals something important about emotional processing. The common cultural assumption is that we should suppress negative emotions or immediately try to replace them with positive ones. If you're angry, you should calm down. If you're sad, you should cheer up. If you're anxious, you should relax. But psychological research increasingly shows that emotional suppression is actually harmful for mental health. When you try to push down or ignore negative emotions, they don't disappear. They build up and often come out in more destructive ways later. What this metal music research demonstrates is an alternative approach: matching and processing. When you match your emotional state with appropriate stimuli, music that reflects the intensity you're feeling, you create space to actually feel and process those emotions. The emotion moves through you rather than getting stuck or amplified, and you can then move on more effectively than if you tried to suppress it. The study's authors specifically noted that extreme music did not make angry participants angrier, but rather appeared to help them process negative emotions and calm down. It furthermore seemed to stimulate feelings of activity and inspiration, positive emotional states that help participants engage with their experience rather than being overwhelmed by it. Now let's address the practical applications of this research, because this has real implications for how we think about music in schools, therapy, and daily life. The researchers specifically mention that greater understanding of anger, processing through music, may be beneficial within schools. Young people, particularly adolescents, are the greatest consumers of music, and they often use music for emotional regulation. Currently, many schools ban or discourage extreme music based on the assumption that it's harmful. But this research suggests that allowing students who are angry and upset to listen to their preferred music, including extreme genres, might actually be therapeutic rather than problematic. Instead of forcing them to suppress their emotions or conform to calm music that doesn't match their internal state, we might be better served by allowing them to process their emotions through music that resonates with them. This doesn't mean encouraging violence or aggression. It means recognizing that music choice is often an adaptive emotional regulation strategy, not a symptom of dysfunction. Now let's talk about individual differences, because not everyone responds to metal music the same way. This study specifically recruited extreme music fans, people who already enjoyed and regularly listened to genres like metal, punk, and hardcore. The effects observed might be quite different for people who don't like or aren't familiar with extreme music. If someone who hates metal is forced to listen to it while angry, they probably would get more irritated because the music doesn't match their preferences or provide the emotional validation it offers to fans. The key finding isn't that metal music has magical anger-reducing properties for everyone. It's that for people who already connect with this music, it serves an important and healthy emotional regulation function. This supports the broader psychological principle that effective coping strategies are highly individual. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay. The problem comes when we pathologize or ban certain coping strategies based on assumptions rather than evidence. Before we close, I want to address why the cultural stereotype about metal music persists despite evidence against it. Heavy metal and extreme music have been moral panic targets for decades, blamed for everything from teen delinquency to violent crime to devil worship. But as this research shows, these claims have yet to be substantiated using controlled experimental methods. The stereotype persists, partly because of confirmation bias. When someone who listens to metal does something violent, the music gets blamed. When someone who listens to pop or classical music does something violent, their music taste is rarely mentioned. We also tend to be suspicious of things that look and sound different from what we're familiar with. The aesthetic of metal music can be intimidating if you're not part of that community, but the research is clear. The music itself doesn't create anger or violence in listeners. What it does create is a space for emotional processing, community connection, and cathartic release for people who connect with it. The chaotic sound isn't creating chaos in people's lives. It's providing a structured way to engage with chaotic feelings that are already there. Now here's the broader message from this research. We need to be careful about judging people's emotional regulation strategies based on surface level assumptions. Someone listening to screaming, aggressive music might actually be engaging in healthy emotional processing, not spiraling into violence. Someone listening to calm, peaceful music might be avoiding and suppressing difficult emotions rather than dealing with them. The content or volume of the music tells us very little about what's actually happening psychologically for the listener. What matters is whether the music serves a functional purpose for that individual in managing their emotional life. The Sharman and Dingle study provides scientific validation for what metal fans have been saying for years. This music helps them. It doesn't harm them. It provides community, identity, emotional catharsis, and a safe space to process difficult feelings without judgment. The parents and educators and cultural critics who have spent decades warning about the dangers of metal music were simply wrong. The music isn't the problem. Misunderstanding its function and pathologizing people's authentic emotional expression, that's the problem. If you're struggling with anger management, difficulty processing emotions, or finding healthy ways to regulate your emotional life, professional support can help. I offer psychological consultation services in Munich, Germany, and work with evidence-based approaches to emotional regulation that respect individual differences in coping strategies. Thank you for watching Psychology with Sergiu Popovici. If this video helped you understand the actual psychology of metal music and emotional processing, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Your music choice isn't a symptom. It might be your solution.